This is a short documentary about blackface, racist characters, storytelling, and, of course, stereotypes. Minstrel show, also known as minstrelsy in America, theatrical form, became very popular in the early 19th century to the early 20th century that was founded on the comic enchantment of racial stereotypes in both Europe and America. Thomas Stopford Rice is considered to be the father of minstrelsy due to his introduction of Jim Crow. He had such an impact that laws in America were introduced based on the character. Behaviors like this allowed for the formation of the white supremacist Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan, novel based on racist ideas and stereotypes, making black people the villains and savages and white people the heroes and heroines. Tarzan, also known as the light-skinned one, was taken in by Disney. The face of Disney is Mickey Mouse, which is based on the character called Jajabo. Jajabo is connected to the original minstrel show stereotype called a pickaninny, which is usually an unkempt-haired person now with red lips, wide mouths, with a watermelon inside. These illustrations had a multitude and a plethora of other characters, such as the mulatto, the Jezebel, the buck, Uncle Tom, Mammy, Zipcoon, and Jim Crow. As I have previously aforementioned, minstrelsy was not exclusive to America, but also very prominent in Europe, particularly the very country that I grew up in, the United Kingdom. The variety show, as you can see on the screen, began in 1958 and heard in millions and millions upon views, and many activists signed petitions against it.
And it is also very patronizing.
You're going well over the
No.
It carried on airing until well into 1978. Century, spectators was waving goodbye to the theatre of minstrelsy and saying hello to the new one, animation. As you can see, what is depicted here is the main character being the lead, also symbolizing a pickaninny, followed by crows, known as Jim Crow, and of course the Mammy was the end of the sequence. This was for children, primarily the audience, an advertisement that would probably have been played over and over again, and we wonder why we still have racism today. True to what I have just shown you, animation consumption was primarily for adults before the pre-code era. But after the pre-code era, World War II and the Great Depression was over, the government cracked down hard on theatres, saying nudity, sex, and a plethora of other things were not allowed. It would be in great time after the release of Snow White, making Walt Disney a household name. A name to which I myself am very familiar with, and I'm sure many of you out there are familiar with too. But as a black woman, I felt I had talked enough about racism towards black people, but rather I wanted to explore more on the anti-Semitism Walt Disney had. So I interviewed a graffiti artist known as TIPTIC to get what their views on the matter is. How did you feel finding out Walt Disney was anti-Semitic?
To be honest with you, I used to be a really big fan of his work when I was younger, and I only found out in recent years about him doing blackface with Mickey Mouse, and also how he would pay, like he wouldn't hire Jewish people, or just always having a thing with like not hiring Jewish people or paying them less, or just like treating them differently, which is almost like just horrible. Like to hear that in recent years, like that I was influenced by his work when I was younger, but then to then hear how he was influenced by his work was just so horrible, like, and upsetting to know that he was such a racist man.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I agree with you, and it's really
sad. It's really sad. Like, I wish he didn't have those views, and I wish that's. You
was
can't change a
against,
person's views. They're ignorant sometimes. So
he was completely against you know, when the US government was like fighting Nazis, he was completely against
probably
that.
because he was one. Very like horrible, just really, really backwards. Just not nice views at all. But I just wish he didn't have to design the characters I liked, to be honest with you. I wish it was a different man with different views.
Okay. Do you think that art and animation world has progressed from anti-Semitism?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I haven't seen a lot of anti-Semitism, like, actually, like, cartoons that I've seen that I've got offended by. I've only ever seen, like, actually I have, on Twitter, I've seen stuff like anti-Semitic, like, drawings or whatever, but that's only recently of what's happening in the news. I've seen stuff like that, but other than that, I haven't really seen that many, but yeah.
Okay, that's good. How would we go forth in the future with representation in the art and animation communities? That could mean including Jewish characters and Jewish artists creating work.
We could subtly put symbols in to cartoons or things just so kids are like, oh, what's that, mum? Or like, what's that? Like, you could put a Jewish star in it and they could learn about what the Jewish star means in a cartoon. Could be a really cool idea, just to kind of teach them just like some of the views of the Jews. Like, a lot of their views are very peaceful, and I think like that could be something that could be put into a cartoon, and it'd be really cool.
Speaking to TIPTIC, the graffiti artist, but I wanted to learn a little bit more, so I decided to talk about Mulan and whether or not Mulan is a good representation for the Asian community. I myself am not Asian, but I thought it would be a really good idea to speak to another close friend, also known as Leah, from an American Filipino background. She is an art teacher in training and, of course, an amazing illustrator in practice. As an adult, did you think that Mulan was a good representation for the Asian community?
I don't think per se it's the best Asian representation, because it's mostly a representation of Chinese culture. I don't know if I have the full authority to kind of speak to if it was good Chinese representation, but from what I've seen from like other Chinese people, like from what they said, of course it's not like the perfect representation, and also there's some certain depictions in that movie, especially of the villains of that movie, were the Huns, that are like actually pretty racist. But from what they've said, it's like it's not completely disrespectful. It actually does a pretty good job, even though it doesn't follow the like actual lore of what the original folklore was. I will say, however, when I was a kid, the movie itself was actually pretty like important to me personally, just because it was the first just kind of Asian representation that you've seen that I saw in like a Disney movie, and I love Disney movies. I loved animated movies, so seeing Mulan was actually kind of important to me. It was my favorite Disney movie, and it still is. I still really enjoy that movie. It's just you didn't really see too many Asians ever really on the big screen, and to have a Disney animated feature on it was really cool. Another added thing was Mulan's singing voice was a Filipina. And Salonga. So that was also important to the Filipino community. I remember. Actually, I think this might bleed into the next questions that you had. What was your next few questions again?
It was do you think that the American and Europeans have done a respectful amount of research on the East Asian or Oriental sort of community over the years? I don't know, like I don't want to overstep, but what's your thoughts on that? And if it bleeds well with like what we previously mentioned?
Yeah, so the thing is, with how I feel about just like Disney doing all these like representation things in general, it mattered to me definitely when I was younger, but the older I get, the more I kind of realize that I think it's a little foolish to kind of expect, you know, a really big corporation like Disney to, you know, be able to represent a group of people, you know, especially if it's like a minority group. I don't think people should be holding their breath.
Yeah.
I think representation from those companies, especially when the people in charge of those movies aren't actually like
Asian.
the director
Yeah.
aren't Asian. Like, I think an example is the most recent one, Raya.
Oh, yeah.
Asian Americans not really being at the forefront of these movies. The most recent one that Disney came out with was Raya.
Yeah.
And the co-director of that movie were a Mexican American man and a white man. So they're not really being directed by Asian people. Or specifically, I believe the culture being represented was just like Southeast Asian. So there weren't any Southeast Asian directors on it. I'm sure there were some Southeast Asian artists because I've followed a few. But my point is that if you really want, you know, to give good representation, that also extends to the people behind the movie as well. So I feel like if you are a white director, or if you are a director who is not of a culture's origin that you want to depict, I feel like there's something you should ask yourself, am I the right person to be doing this story and taking credit for it, right? I feel like white directors trying to give leeway for Asian directors to tell their stories and be able to have them represent themselves and their experiences and their culture. It's just a matter of kind of just decolonizing the whole industry, really. Like having all of that champion diversity, but the people behind the movie are like, it's not, you know, the people of that culture, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that bleeds into the third question really well.
Yeah, because like you could do a lot of research. Well, this one's more on the second question. Is you can do a lot of good research on a culture. It's been done a lot before. There's plenty of examples of like Asian stories that have been told by white showrunners and white directors that have been really good because they did really do their research. Examples like Avatar, The Last Airbender, even Kung Fu Panda is pretty good. They did really good work, but it's just a matter of, if you have these stories, I feel like you should make way for Asian directors to also be able to tell their stories, because you don't really see a lot of that as much. Sure, you get the stories, but the people telling them are the ones who should be given a chance, you know?
Moving on from this, it has made me understand how important art, theatre, and media in general is to the average consumer, whether they recognize it or not. How us as artists must convey a good representation of how people are, and to learn from history, such as the mistakes that Disney had made in the past, and even as late as the early 2000s, where Blackface was still carried on being performed on shows such as Little Britain. What we live in today is absolutely far from perfect, but it has opened up doors such as not only allowing black people to be in front of the cameras and ethnic minorities, but to also be behind the cameras too. The value of hearing our stories being told by us and for us. But alas, my dear viewers, I have come too hard on the Western animation and theatre communities, but rather I ought to look east next time and to learn a little more over there. honest with themselves. I'ma be honest with you, is what I do. If they ain't honest with themselves, I'ma be honest with you, is what I do.